Hello and welcome to a very short tutorial about the implementation of Maya's Arnold Renderer. As you can see, usually Maya has, with these objects, a very simple renderer, and to bring it up I'm using the rendering editor's render view. Some of you might get the Arnold render view if you bring it up, and that looks a little different. That looks like this. Either of these two views are fine. However, for expediency's sake, we're just going to be using the Arnold render view. So the Arnold render view is set up so that you can render from any of the current cameras that you have. Currently I'm rendering in, if you go to Panels, Perspective, you can see I have two cameras to choose from. One is the camera that is actually affixed to the side of the car, and you can see it in motion here. And there's a couple different problems. First of all, the wheels are going backwards. That can be fixed. Secondly, the field of view is cutting off the car, and to fix that you want to go to View, select Camera, and then View, go to Camera Attribute Editor, and you want to make sure that the near clipping plane and the far clipping plane are set appropriately. The near clipping plane in this case is actually needs to be a little closer to Maya's eye and a little further. Usually it's between the values of 1 and 10,000, but in this case it needs sort of special treatment because the camera is right next to the model. But that's something you only have to fix if you have clipping plane issues. This is to show that I have two different cameras. This is the one I want to render from, and this is the one that is basically my perspective camera. And you can see the animation of the car going this way with the icon of the camera attached to it. So most computer rendered images are quite stiff, sort of stale. They don't really look realistic because they don't have things like bounced light. And bounced light is sort of where you get this soft pooling of shade. So just as an example, I'd like to show everyone a sample of what this looks like with just a Maya software renderer. You see it's actually kind of flat. It looks very antiseptic, not very believable. So the first thing we want to do is make sure that you have the Arnold menu available. If not, you need to make sure that you've downloaded the add-on pack to make sure that you've got it going, and we can ask the class TA about that. Secondly, I'd like you to download something called a high dynamic range image. And a high dynamic range image is known by the acronym HDRI, and that is a image that has pretty much several different exposures in one. So everything looks sort of the lightest part of the image does not dictate the darkest, and vice versa. So everything is sort of evenly lit all the way through. And secondly, for the purposes of this, it's going to be a panorama. So the one I'm looking for specifically is one that you can find by just coming in and going to Google and type in HDRI Haven is where things are right now. It may change in the future, but the name of the HDRI image that I've been using for years is called Labombo, L-A-B-O-M-B-O, and you can find it right here under Polyhaven. So clicking on that takes me to this page, and just clicking on the download button here, you don't even need the EXR file. Just click on the download button and it will start a download to your designated download area. Make sure it's a .exr. It's actually a new format. It's not a JPEG. So when you get that, what you're going to want to do is copy it and then go to your project. You should have, of course, set the project to ITP 215. And you can see where these subfolders are. We're going to be putting ours into source images, as you can see I've done earlier. So make sure you put this in the source images folder. So we're going to be using this when we have to read it in. But first, we need to make sure that we have something to attach it to. So at this point, I need people to open up their outliner so we can track this and read in the first thing, which is an Arnold light, Skydome light. There you can see it actually pop into the background. And double click the icon for it and it should give you the information here in an attribute editor, or your attribute editor might be docked over here on the right, either or. But go to the color swath, click on the checkerboard. We're in fairly familiar territory now. Click on File and actually direct it using this folder icon to the location of where you've dropped it under Source Images. And remember, you need the HDR. The minute you open that up, you'll see it pop into the background here. And this is a special high dynamic range image that will be radiating its color on everything to look like it's actually part of the scene. So let's tweak a couple of things to make sure everything is sorted. First of all, make sure it's on RAW for color space. That's default, set up in Maya now, I believe. And the other thing we want to do is open up the hypershade, and let's tweak a few variables here. You can click on Textures and click on the file here if you want to get to that information as soon as possible. But the material viewer information we need to sort out first. Then we can double click it and go through and add a couple more things in the attribute editor. So one of the first things we want to do is come down to Auto Generate TX Textures, make sure that's on. The next thing I'd like to do is to bring people over to the render settings. You can get to it one of two ways, either the clapboard with the gear, or you can go to Windows, Rendering Editors, and then go down to Render Settings right under Render View. So we want to load up the Arnold Renderer here. So the first thing in Render Settings we want to change over to is go from Maya Software to Arnold Renderer. We then get a new tab for Arnold Renderer here, and you want to click on that. I would up each of these variables, the next 5 variables. Camera anti-aliasing goes to 4, diffuse 3, specular 3, transmission 3. Subsurface scattering, don't worry about that. But I would like people to undo or expand the collapsible motion blur and click on that. That's going to be a bit of a render hog, but it is worth it. So you want to be able to make sure that you know how much time your CPU is spending on this. So please be aware of doing single renders first before you get into doing long sequences of renders. The resolution, let's start changing these in the attribute editor. Goes from 1000 to 1024. And then I'd like people to scroll down a bit. And the samples is what we're going to be, oh, sorry, it's right here. Samples is the thing we want to go from 1 to 2. It will really make things look nice, but be prepared that is another bit of a render hog. So when I go to the Arnold render view now, I want to be very clear on which camera I should be rendering from if I want it to match this view. This camera is perspective, the other cam is camera 2. Frankly, I don't like leaving it that benign, especially if it's something that I've created. So what I want to do is, usually I grab the camera. I can do it this way too. Select camera, perspective, and if I go to camera 2, I can grab select camera there. And it's on the motion path group. Of course it is, because I parented it to the car. But in this case, I like to have it named something very obvious like Cinematic Capitals Cam, so that when I come down and try to select it from within Arnold's render view, it really pops. See, Cinematic Cam shape as opposed to persp shape. So if I want to do the perspective view, which I think might give us a slightly better view of things right now, I'm going to select it first, and then I'm going to hit this play button. And when I do, it starts rendering out the image. But notice it's taking a lot of time going over the area with the motion blur because it really has to think about it, because it has to calculate that to look real. Now, it looks incredible. And you can see it go from kind of this sandy first pass to doing these small squares of calculation and doing more and more passes until we have soft light, we have bounced light from the HDRI image, and we have motion blur. Really nice stuff. If you have an Arnold watermark, no worries. That's just what happens with the student edition. But rendering using the Arnold Renderer is really an amazing way of setting things up. Make sure that you do a pass when you're rendering to a folder in the render settings. Go to Common. And since I'm going to the Images folder, usually I create a subfolder. So if this were Scene 1, Clip 1, I would say go to the subfolders, SO1, CO1, and then I would name the image the same thing. That's kind of how I learned at Oddworld. And I'd choose a JPEG. I would go to, instead of a single frame, I would go to Name, Number, Extension, and that will change this information up here. You see this up here? This is the thing you really want to double and triple check before you start rendering, because it lets you know exactly where it's going to be putting things. And I then want to change my frame range to reflect that which I'm trying to render out, not just several that it chooses. Again, if I'm going to be going from perspective or cinematic cam, I've got to be prepared to choose the right one. I like personally to just go to 640 by 480. There's no real need to go much bigger just for class, especially since it's a beginning class. And I usually like to render 1 or 2 frames just to make sure it is working the way I want it to first. Then I go to the rendering mode in Maya. I go to render and then down to batch render. It does take a while. Look how long it takes for this to kind of let me know it's rendering. If you go down the right corner, it says rendering with Arnold Renderer, but it looks stuck. It is not stuck. It's really trying to compile everything I've asked it to, and it takes a long time thinking. So when you set up batch render in motion, give it some time. Now you can see the percentage of the rendering done. If I click on the script editor, it's actually more descriptive, and it tells me exactly where it's saving things, which allows me to check on just 2 images before I try to run 150. And that will be invaluable for me, because that allows me the chance to check on the renderers themselves with just 2 images before I set things in motion to go the full range. Those of you on Macintoshes, you want to make sure that your permissions are sorted out so that it can save things to the right subfolder. These were previous images that were already in the folder, but here's the first 2 that I rendered, which is from the view of the cinematic camera. And again, we have the soft light. I've got to lower this. But everything looks okay, so I'm a little more confident now rendering the full range so that I can render the entire sequence. But I want to check the first 2 frames to know that they are going to the right directory in the right format before I do anything else. I hope this helps. Please come up and talk to the instructor or TA in class if not. Thank you.